Our next presenter is Cong Seow. He is currently a third-year PhD student in the Department of Pharmacology and Pharmacy at the University of Hong Kong. His project is focused on the development of dual targeting platform for simultaneous drug delivery to the nose and lung through intranasal powder administration. Okay.
Hi, okay. Yep. Thank you, Mathura, for the introduction, and thank you to the DDL committee for organizing the conference and for the opportunity for me to share my research project. My name is Han Cong, and I'm a PhD student from the University of Hong Kong under the supervision of Dr. Jenny Lam. So today I'll be sharing with you my research project about simultaneous nasal and lung delivery of an antiviral metallodrug using dual targeting powder formulation. So a brief background. So nowadays we don't wear masks and there's no more quarantine requirements, but respiratory viral infections are still a global health problem, especially COVID-19 and the various variants of concerns. So these respiratory viruses, they affect both the nose and lungs, and they're not limited to a specific region in the respiratory tract. So an effective antiviral treatment, in my opinion, will be to administer a broad-spectrum antiviral for delivery to both the upper and lower respiratory tract. And early administration of such an effective antiviral treatment can improve patient outcomes and possibly control unpredictable outbreaks. A brief background about the drug that we're working with today is a metallodrug. Its name is called ranitidine bismuth citrate, or RBC in short. So metallodrugs are, unlike other small molecules, they contain metal as an active ingredient. Some examples of metallodrugs will include like silver or lithium. They're also used as therapeutic agents. So a recent study showed that RBC, this metallodrug, has potent anti-SARS-CoV-2 activity. And because it inhibits the SARS-CoV-2 helicase, which is responsible for viral replication, the bismuth ions inside RBC actually irreversibly displace the zinc ions in the helicase and reduces the functionality of the helicase, and this suppresses viral replication. RBC is actually repurposed from an anti-ulcer drug, which is for the treatment of Helicobacter pylori, or the bacteria that is responsible for stomach ulcers. And it has a similar mechanism of action, whereby the bismuth ions defunctionalize key zinc enzymes in bacteria, and this provides antimicrobial as well as mucosal protective effects in the anti-ulcer treatment regimen. In the market now, RBC is commercially available as oral tablets, and it has a well-established safety profile. However, it suffers from low systemic absorption and poor lung distribution. This makes it not suitable for use as an antiviral for respiratory viral infections. So in this project, we propose the reformulation of RBC as an intranasal dry powder, and this will achieve high local concentrations in the respiratory epithelium where viral replication occurs. And also, this will reduce systemic distribution and reduce any unwanted side effects. Okay, here comes the interesting part, which is about dual targeting powder formulation. So I would like to introduce to you this concept which may revolutionize the way that we look at DDL. So DDL stands for drug delivery to the lungs, and we tend to look at drug delivery to the lungs and drug delivery to the nose as two separate subjects. For example, oral inhalers tend to bypass the nasal cavity, while nasal formulations want to minimize lung deposition. But in this case, we propose this concept, which is dual targeting formulation. The aim is to deliver the drug to both the nose and lungs simultaneously. And the application for this will be especially in respiratory viral infections, whereby the virus affects both the nose as well as the deep lung regions. So by depositing the drug, or delivering the drug to both sites, we are able to deliver antiviral to the sites of infection. So to do this, we need to control the aerosol deposition profile of the dual targeting formulation. And we know that powders, their aerosol deposition are mainly dependent on their particle size. So particles that are more than 10 micrometers, we usually say they deposit in the nose, while particles that are less than 5 micrometers will deposit in the lung. So by mixing two species of powder with different particle sizes, we aim to deliver the drug, in this case the antiviral, to both the upper and lower respiratory tract. To do this, we employ a particle engineering technique that Harry previously explained briefly, known as spray freeze drying. So spray freeze drying actually consists of 2 steps. The first step being spray freezing, whereby a liquid feed comprising of the drug, which is RBC in this case, and the excipients, mannitol and leucine, are atomized using 2 different atomizing nozzles. In this case, we use the ultrasonic nozzle as well as the 2-fluid nozzle. And after atomizing this liquid into fine droplets, the droplets are frozen immediately in liquid nitrogen and subsequently transferred to a freeze dryer, whereby the frozen solvent crystals subline to gas. And what we get from this process are very porous particles with different particle sizes. And this is because we employ 2 different atomizing nozzles. The ultrasonic nozzle tends to produce particles with larger particle sizes, while the particles produced with the 2-fluid nozzle are smaller. And with these 2 formulations, we mix them using a tubular mixer with good mixing process to produce a mix or dual particle formulation that has a desired aerosol deposition profile. So let's look at the morphology of these particles under the scanning electron microscope. So when it's unformulated, the RBC looks like very crystalline and irregularly shaped. But after spray freeze drying, you can see that the particles are, like Harry's particles, very spherical and porous. And from the images, we also can see a large size difference. So the particles produced with the 2-fluid nozzle are very small compared to the particles that are produced with the ultrasonic nozzle being very large in size. We also look at the size distribution using laser diffraction. And we see a similar trend. The D50 of the particles produced by the ultrasonic nozzle are large compared to those produced with the 2-fluid nozzle. And if we mix them in a 1-to-1 mixing ratio or 1-to-1 mass ratio, the RBC mixed formulation, you can see a blend of large and small particles in the image. And if you look at the volumetric diameter, D50 is about the average of the individual formulations. The density distribution graphs show a bimodal distribution of the RBC mixed formulation. You can see the 2 peaks. They correspond to the small as well as the large particles. It's also important to look at the aerodynamic diameter of these particles, and we find out the aerosol performance of these powders using the next generation impactor coupled to a 1-liter gas expansion chamber. So this will mimic the nasal cavity and as well as the deep lung region. So the powders are dispersed using a powder nasal spray. In this case, it's an active device. And the deposition fractions are presented in these 4 fractions as follows. So the residual fraction being the fraction that's not unemitted from the nasal spray. The nasal fraction being particles that are more than 10 micrometers. The throat fraction being particles that are between 5 and 10 micrometers. And the fine particle fraction being particles that are less than 5 micrometers. So we have these 4 deposition fractions. And from the results, we can see that the powder is very well dispersed from the nasal spray, with almost 0% of residual fraction left inside the nasal spray. And the formulation RBC USN, which is produced by the ultrasonic nozzle, has a very high nasal fraction, which means that most of it is deposited in the nose. The formulation produced with the 2-fluid nozzle RBC TFN shows a higher fine particle fraction, which means that a high proportion of the particles are deposited in the lungs. And by mixing them in a 1:1 mixing ratio, we get an almost average of the individual formulations. And in fact, we observe a linear trend between the aerosol performance to the mixing ratio of the formulations. So in this case, when we increase the fraction of RBC-TFN in the formulation, the nasal fraction decreases while the fine particle fraction increases. So this linear trend actually implies that we can actually customize the nasal and lung deposition profile of the dual targeting formulation, such that by varying the mixing ratio, you can get aerosol performance that you want of the dual targeting formulation. So we did some mice biodistribution study, and in this in vivo study where we compare between oral administration and intratracheal administration, we see a 3.8-fold increase in RBC concentration and low bismuth concentration in the other organs, which demonstrate reduced systemic absorption as well as distribution. So some future studies regarding this dual targeting formulation is actually in its early stage of development. We like to look at, we are attempting in vivo antiviral studies for sequential administration of intranasal as well as intratracheal administration of powder in hamster models of COVID-19. And we also like to improve the nasal characteristics of the formulation such as like what Marie mentioned, nasal retention time, viscosity, or even pH and osmolality. We also want to elucidate what is the particle interaction or dispersion mechanisms in the dual targeting formulation, and also look at the stability of these formulations after mixing. So what I've introduced to everyone today is it's actually a concept which is dual targeting powder formulations. This drug delivery platform is potentially a new way of delivering therapeutic agents to the respiratory tract, not just to the nose or to the lung, but actually to both the nasal cavity as well as the deep lung region. So with a proof of concept established, I think that this concept can also be applied to other particle engineering techniques such as spray drying and other therapeutic agents such as small molecules, antibodies, vaccines. The list goes on, maybe proteins or nucleic acids. So in our group, we are currently working on a dual targeting formulation of neutralizing antibodies by spray drying as well. So I'd like to thank the University of Hong Kong for seed funding, as well as my supervisor, Dr. Jenny Lam, as well as our collaborators from the Department of Chemistry in HKU. Thank you for listening, and all questions are welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Han. Before I open up to the audience questions, I have one question for you.
Yeah.
You mentioned that the drug that's repurposed has antimicrobial effects. And I just want to know, because there's commensal bacteria in your nose and airways, we don't generally want to get rid of those because that can make an individual prone to superbug infections. I was wondering if you can speak to the effect of the drug. Does it spare any good commensal bacteria in the airways? I know this wasn't the focus of the presentation.
Yeah, this is an interesting question, and thank you for your question. So I think you're right, because bismuth itself kills bacteria with an antimicrobial action. So good bacteria maybe in the stomach or even the lungs can be killed, and we want this good bacteria. So I think if you see some anti-ulcer treatments, they actually also prescribe probiotics to supplement some of the good bacteria, or even cut short the regimen or stick to a fixed regimen such that we don't exceed the treatment of such that there are unwanted side effects. For the lungs, I think nowadays I think there is also good bacteria in the lungs. So there is a possibility that over-administration or overdosing of these metallodrugs may lead to killing of the good bacteria as well. So possibly we may want to supplement with probiotics or make sure that the dosing regimen doesn't lead to unwanted side effects like superbugs and stuff. Yeah.
Thank you so much. There's a question at the back.
So I really like this. My question is around whether, if you take the view that the large formulation is acting as a kind of carrier for the small formulation, does that result in powder that has better properties when it comes to processing or automated filling? So does it give you a nicer formulation to work with?
So I guess you're trying to try to elucidate some of the mechanisms of dispersion in this dual targeting formulation. So that is a possible mechanism, such in the sense that the larger particles are acting as a carrier for the smaller particles. Since there is a linear trend, it shows that there is actually no interaction between the larger and smaller particles. And I think you may be right to say that these larger particles produced with the ultrasonic nozzle can act as carriers for the smaller particles. Yeah.
It's great work. I really like it.
Thank you.
There's one question from online. If you have mentioned biodistribution studies, have you done PK studies? It would be interesting to see how PK parameters are involved.
Yeah, we have done a more complete version of the PK study, and but of course we use a different dosing between the oral, IV, as well as intratracheal, as well as intranasal routes of administration. So it will be interesting to look at what is the PK profile of a dual targeting formulation. But first, we need to look at how to establish the protocol for, in maybe small animals, powder administration to both the nose and lungs. Yeah.
There's a question at the back.
Yeah, hi, I'm Oros Lastor from Iconovo, and I really liked your talk, and I'm I'm very glad also to see that we are not the only ones doing both nasal and pulmonary delivery. So I'm very interested in what you're doing. And my question is, have you tested your setup with some nasal casts to verify if this 10 cut off 10 above is the nose and 5 below is the lung?
Yeah, I think this is one of our interests. So currently we are using a 1-liter glass expansion chamber, which is sort of like a simplified model of a nasal anatomy. But we are interested to look at nasal cars, maybe 3D printed models, or even during the nasal workshop, different kinds of nasal cars that are segmented, or even regional deposition. So this is one of our research interests as well. So I encourage, if there are any collaborators who would like to work on this dual targeting powder formation, please look for me. We can see how we can develop this platform for more applications, not only for respiratory viral infections, but for other therapeutic agents as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Han.
Yeah. Thank you.